From the pages of newspapers to breaking records at the big screen, comics have had a rise, fall, and rise again in pop culture. Comics first started with the comic strip. The first comic strip is considered to be The Yellow Kid, written by Richard Outcault. It was written in 1895. Since then, there have been hundreds of different comic strips in thousands of newspapers internationally. These comic strips began as humorous sections to take away from the rest of the news. However, some of these comic strips began to take a more serious nature. Strips like The Spirit and Dick Tracy were serialized, with weekly installments in a long-running story. This began an era of serious comics and comic books. The modern comic book started with a classic superhero comic. The first superhero comic was Action Comics #1, released in 1938. This comic book redefined the idea of a comic book and introduced the iconic Superman. Superman quickly became legendary. He was immortalized in many different mediums, including radio, cartoons, and serials that were put in front of movies. Superman's first appearance that was not in the pages of a comic book was in 1940 with his radio show.
Boys and girls, your attention, please. Presenting a new exciting radio program featuring the thrilling adventures of an amazing and incredible personality. Faster than an airplane, more powerful than a locomotive, impervious to bullets.
Up in the sky, look! It's a bird! It's a plane! It's Superman!
3 times a week, Superman would take on the mob, common criminals, and supervillains. People would listen intently to a cast featuring Bud Collyer, Joanne Alexander, and Jackson Beck. Superman first appeared in person with Max Fleischer's Superman cartoons placed in front of movies in the 1940s.
From the planet Krypton, the Man of Steel, Superman. Possessing remarkable physical strength, Superman fights a never-ending battle for truth and justice, disguised as a mild-mannered newspaper reporter, Clark Kent.
Children and adults alike would line up weekly and spend their days in movie theaters, watching an alien from the planet Krypton beating up criminals in the underworld. Almost every child knew who Superman was and knew his message: truth, justice, and the American way. Superman was the first superhero ever to be shown in the pages of a comic book. Because of him, comic books hit their all-time high, everyone knew who he was, and because of this, everyone bought comic books, and comics hit their peak. In 1941, the war came to America. Comic book writers responded with a wave of propaganda. A new hero, Captain America, was introduced in March of 1941. Captain America was just a soldier who gained his superhuman strength due to good old-fashioned American science. He famously punched Adolf Hitler in the face. Other comic books also incorporated the war, including Superman and Action Comics. Superman would often fight alongside the American soldiers against the Nazis and Japanese. Many comics would feature heroes fighting the enemy while asking for bonds. The covers of dozens of issues would have heroes claiming that the American public was fighting the war because they bought the bonds. In December of 1941, a brand new villain was introduced in Master Comics #21, Captain Nazi. Captain Nazi was instantly World Enemy #1 and was the bane of comic books. The comic book industry would also demonize the enemy with caricatures of the Japanese and the Germans. This use of propaganda during World War II helped to boost comic sales and increased the impact on pop culture at the time. Comic books had a fall in popularity after World War II with the introduction of the Comic Code. This code censored comic books and caused many changes in the comic industry, which almost killed it. However, the main comic companies, Marvel and DC, survived, and now the comic industry is back on the rise. Although comic sales are not what they once were, the comic characters are thriving in other mediums. Over the last several years, many comic book movies have been released to box office success. The famous ones, of course, being the Marvel movies, with Iron Man, Iron Man 2, Thor,
I will end this.
and Captain America.
I know if I can do this. This is why you've been chosen.
All leading up to the record-breaking Avengers.
Bad call. He loves his hammer.
You want me to put the hammer down?
The brand new comic book movies coming out in 2013 are Iron Man 3,
of what's left of your life.
from Marvel, and Man of Steel.
My father believed if the world found out who I really was, they'd reject me. He was convinced that the world wasn't ready. What do you think?
from DC. However, many movies have been released to box office glory that are from more unknown comic books. These comic movies include 300,
This is Sparta!
V for Vendetta,
And ideas are bulletproof. Remember the 5th of November.
The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen,
Best adventurer who ever lived has been recruited to find a madman.
He's called the Phantom.
To stop him, you must lead a team like nothing the world has seen.
Men in Black,
Men in Black.
AMC's The Walking Dead, and Watchmen. For the first time ever, comic books are considered literature. Mouse, by Art Spiegelman, is a different look at the Holocaust, and it won a LA Time Book Prize for Fiction. Watchmen, by Alan Moore, is the first graphic novel to appear on Time's Top 100 novel list. The Sandman, by Neil Gaiman, is the first comic to win a literary award after it won a World Fantasy Award. Comic books started as simple comic strips in the pages of newspapers, but they quickly evolved into fully fledged comic books, radio shows, and box office movies. The impact of these comics has grown from the very beginning to propaganda during World War II and today. The impact of comic books is only growing.